Let me introduce myself. My name is Dito Renatus with ID number A121-22-146, and in this video presentation I will be explaining about the characteristic of reference that make co-reference easier. Okay, in the topic characteristics of reference that make co-reference easier focuses on what make it easier to identify when two or more expressions refer to the same thing in a conversations or text. But before I dig deeper into the topic, let me explain what is co-reference is. Co-reference happens when different words or phrases point to the same person, object, or idea, and certain features of the thing being referred to, called the referent, can help make these connections clearer. Okay, now let's move to the characteristic. For the first characteristic, we have uniqueness. Uniqueness refers to the quality of being one of a kind or distinct from others. When a referent is unique or very specific, it becomes easier to identify. For example, a name like Mount Everest or a title like the President of the United States is unique because it points to a specific person, place, or a thing. When a referent is unique, it is easier for listeners or readers to recognize and connect co-reference to it without confusion. And the next characteristic, we have proximity. Proximity refers to how close things are to each other in space, time, or context. If the expressions that refer to the same things are close to each other in our conversations or text, it becomes easier to connect them. This reduces the chance of forgetting or losing track of the referent. For example, if a person is introduced in one sentence and referred to with a pronoun in the next line, the proximity helps make the connections clear. If too much distance separates them, it may cause confusion. And the third characteristic, we have salience. Salience refers to how noticeable, important, or prominent something is in a given context.
Hello, my name is Valen Alkabila Ananda with ID number 147. And now let's talk about the characteristic of anaphors that make reference easier. Just like how certain features of a referent help us identify it, anaphors have their own traits that can make them easier to interpret. One key factor is the type of pronoun being used. Pronouns like he, she, it, and they replace nouns and help us avoid repeating the same words over and over. But the choice of pronoun really matters. For example, personal pronouns usually connect directly to the reference because of context, gender, or number. On the other hand, demonstrative pronouns like this or that can be trickier because they often need more context to make sense. Another thing that makes a big difference is how close the anaphor is to its referent. If the anaphor is right next to the referent in a sentence or paragraph, it's much easier to follow. For example, take the sentence, Alex picked up his guitar. He began to play. Here, the word he is so close to Alex that it's clear who we're talking about. But if the anaphor is far away, like several sentences later or in a completely different part of the text, it becomes harder to figure out. This is because our brains have to work harder to connect the dots. Repetition also helps, especially in longer pieces of writing or when new ideas are introduced. For example, if you keep repeating the reference name, like saying John went to the store, John bought some groceries, It keeps things clear. Sure, it might feel a bit repetitive, but it really helps avoid confusion, especially in more complex contexts where using too many pronouns could make things ambiguous. Now, let's move on to the relationship between an anaphor and its possible reference in anaphor resolution. This is basically the process of figuring out which referent the anaphor is pointing to. It's a critical part of how we understand this course. Several factors play into this, like the structure of the sentence, how the text flows logically, and the context provided. One of the biggest factors here is recency. Usually, the most recently mentioned referent in a sentence or paragraph is the first thing that comes to mind when we're trying to interpret an anaphor. This makes sense because our brains naturally prioritize the most recent information. It's easier and takes less effort to connect it back to something fresh in our memory. For example, if two characters are mentioned and a pronoun like he comes up right after, chances are we'll assume it refers to the last character mentioned. But what happens when there's more than one possible referent? In those cases, we rely heavily on context and logical clues to figure it out. For example, if a story mentioned both a teacher and a student, and then the pronoun he is used, the context, like what's being said about the teacher of the students, will guide us to the right interpretation. These clues help clear up the ambiguity by pointing us toward the most logical connection. Grammar also plays a big role in this process. For instance, we often assume that the subject of a sentence is the referent for any pronoun that comes up in the next clause. This creates a kind of pattern we're used to, which help us follow the flow of the discourse. But when the pattern is broken, say if the pronoun refers to an object instead of the subject, it can cause a bit of confusion until we adjust. This shows just how much grammar influences our understanding of anaphors and their relationships to reference. That is all from me. Thank you.
Now I will be explaining the binding theory. Binding theory explains how pronouns, reflexive words, for example, like himself, herself, themselves, and names work in sentence. Binding theory is composed of three principles. The first principle, principle A, stated that an anaphor, like I said before, like the reflexive word himself, herself, themselves, must be bound in its local domain. So what is a local domain? A local domain is the smallest part of a sentence where certain grammatical rules apply, often defined by the structures of the clause. This means it must have an antecedent within the same clause that governs it. So what is an antecedent? An antecedent is the word or phrase that a pronoun, reflexive word, or other referring expressions refers back to in a sentence. And the next principle is principle B. Principle B stated that a pronoun like he, she, you, etc. must not be bound in its local domain. This means it cannot refer to a noun phrase within the same minimal syntactic unit. Okay, again, what is a syntactic unit? A syntactic unit is a group of words in a sentence that work together as a single part of the sentence. And the last principle is principle C. Principle C stated that referential expressions or expressions like someone's name, for example, John, Mary, Dito, must be free everywhere. This means it cannot have an antecedent that binds it in any domain.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Lara Asiastuti with ID number A1122152. We'll continue the material from my friend about psycholinguistic theories of anaphoric reference. So, psycholinguistics is a branch of science that studies the relationship between language and human mental processes. Then, theory can be defined as a set of interconnected concept, definition, and proposition that aim to explain a phenomenon in a systematic way. While anaphoric is a term in linguistics that refers to a word or phrase that refers to something already mentioned earlier in the text or conversation, so its meaning depends on the preceding context. And reference in linguistics is the way a word or phrase is used to menunjuk or refer to something, such as an object, person, or idea, either in the real world or in a specific context. Some psycholinguistic theories try to explain how people can understand and menyelesaikan anaphoric references in a conversation or text. The first is the memory focus model. So, memory focus is information that is untuk sementara waktu stored in memory to help us understand and connect sentences in a conversation or text. While the model, on the other hand, describes how information is stored, processed, and used to keep the flow of wacana or conversation coherent. The second is centering theory, which proposes that each sentence or section in a discourse has a particular focus called centers, which helps the reader or listener to follow the flow of communication. For example, two sentences. Sentence 1, Maria went to the market. Sentence 2, she bought some fruit. In this example, Maria is the center in the first sentence. In the second sentence, she refers back to Maria and maintains kelancaran or coherence of the discourse. And the last one is the informational load hypothesis. Informational load adalah jumlah and difficulty of information that a person must understand when reading or hearing something, while the hypothesis explains how information load affects a person's ability to understand and process information. So, informational load hypothesis is a theory in psycholinguistics that explains how the information load a text or conversation affects a person's ability to understand and process that information. So I think that's all my material can I explain. That's all for me. Thank you.